am so excited about today's topic because this feels near and dear and very present to both of us as we are in the midst of raising our four kids. So, today's advice are some of the principles that we are working on instilling in our children, and we are very much in the midst. And to many of our listeners, maybe you're done raising your kids, or maybe you're at a different phase of raising your kids. But we hope that some of the dialogue that we share today either instigates a dialogue for you as you raise your kids or some new thoughts, or could be helpful. And ultimately, we'd love to hear from you about your advice because parenting is truly one of the most humbling aspects of my day. I think Jeremiah's too. I don't think I'm sharing for you. Would you consider it a hefty challenge?
Absolutely. We have four of them. They're wonderful kids, but they're kids, and we are trying to figure out how to best point them in the right direction, equip them for their futures. And today we're talking about money and kids. What has been successful in helping kids understand and become comfortable and resourceful with money? Where are those conversations still to be had? We're at a unique spot that our kids are 13, 11, 9, and 7. So we got four of them. And so things like chores around the house, things that's kind of the world we're in. We don't have adult children. We don't yet have big time teenage kids.
Just little teenagers still. Yeah.
Little teenagers. Yeah, that's right. So as we walk into this, a lot of this is talking about some of the things that we're trying, some of the things that we're finding success, and how do you raise kids and equip them with money sense, but also, being open to hearing. I would love to hear feedback from listeners of things that they've done that they found very useful or helpful with their kids of instilling this. And a lot of times, we kind of start this off that people work so hard to provide for their kids. They work so hard to set up a future for their kids, to put food on the table for their kids, to provide the things that they didn't have when they were a kid. And you spend a lot of your time doing that. But a big piece that is sometimes left on the back burner is, are you equipping your kids to, one, be able to generate their own income, right? Are they ready to exist as adults in the world? But two, are they ready to handle and deal with the finances that you're creating? As you're finding success in your business, you're finding success in your career, are your kids going to walk seamlessly into that and really build on the foundation you've created? Or are they going to flounder? Are they going to squander? And how do we train them up in that way?
Right. What's the future that you're aiming for? And I think it is interesting, people talk from a nature versus nurture perspective, but I can already observe in our kids certain tendencies. Let's just talk simplistically between spender and saver. Now, I have to out myself at the beginning of our time together because I was raised by a dad who worked in the financial services industry all my life. And so money conversations and dialogue, whether it was in good times or bad times, were just a part of my upbringing. And one of the things that I've learned as we meet with clients is that, and we oftentimes as we're getting to know our clients, talk about what was money like growing up? Did your parents talk about it? To all of our listeners, we know to be true that money can be some of the most tense, stressful aspects of a marriage, ultimately can be very impactful on the outcome of a marriage. And so one of the things, we talked about this on an earlier episode, is that we find that sometimes it's not that there's a lot of necessarily fighting about money in the home. Sometimes there's just simply a lack of conversation or a lack of dialogue. So I was realizing that what was normal to me, money was talked about a lot while I was growing up, isn't really that normal. There's just frankly a lot of families that just don't talk a lot about money.
And finding those easy on-ramps. I mean, I remember as a kid, we would sit around on like a Saturday or a Sunday, we'd cut coupons as a family. And, my sister and I, we were younger, so we were just practicing using scissors. But it was something to say, oh yeah, we need bread, clip that one. Oh, we're going to get eggs, clip that one. And that was part of, as a family, participating in, I didn't realize at the time, but a money conversation. How do we provide for a family? How are we wise stewards with what we have? And, as my family, developed, there's a point where we stopped cutting coupons. I don't remember exactly when, but that was, I think, an early introduction to the conversation of budget, finances, resources. It was just, physically cutting coupons. I mean, the days have changed. Most people, if they have a coupon, it is a digital thing on their phone. But I think it was a good spot for us, for me, myself as a kid, to kind of enter into that conversation, to have a family conversation.
Yep. And I think, it's not, so if people take away nothing from this time together, I want them to take this away, that sometimes just having the conversation, and it's not necessarily one conversation, it's a regularity of conversation. And as adults, I think it takes a level of vulnerability to expose to our kids challenges that we might be having with money or decisions that we're making. I've talked in general about investment, the idea of investment, and you can use some simplistic illustrations at the level that they would understand, like planting a seed and watching it grow and, et cetera. But I've realized that to my older kids, like you need to layer on a little bit more complexity so they start to understand. And so, one of the things that again was very normal in our house growing up was an allowance. And so at a young age, I remember these little envelopes and learning how to sort money. And that is something that we have carried over in our household. It was probably a couple of years ago that we started talking seriously about an allowance. And this was kind of around the same time that we were talking about chores and daily chores and the habit of chores around our house. And I will say that we're very intentional when we start something in our home. We really try to commit to it, not to say that we don't sometimes have to go back to the drawing board, but to share with those who are listening something that was really helpful for us at the age that our kids are. We invested in one of those digital screens that it's called Skylight, and the kids have zones that they're in charge of on a weekly basis. And the zones are different areas in our home, and there's certain chores that just need to be done every day. And so as they check these tasks off their list, it has to be that they've completed their weekly chores without needing a reminder. So that helped change the dialogue that we were having in our home a lot. They
Hmm.
now have to take personal responsibility to get their chores done. This is the way they contribute to the home. And they can do over and above. There'll be some special tasks or special requests from mom and dad. But at a certain point, we said, okay, as we all contribute to our home, another aspect is learning how to manage money, taking responsibility for the money that we earn and how we spend it. And so we instigated an allowance. Each one of our kids gets the same amount of dollars per week as how old they are. So every year they naturally get a raise. Can't say that we're quite keeping up with inflation, but maybe we are. And and this may be old school, but we started with that good old idea of like envelopes and giving them cold hard cash and talking about how we organize our money into money that we're going to spend today, money that we're going to save for later, and money that we're going to give away. And so they have those three envelopes. And I just thought it was a very like tactile, tangible way for them to learn how to organize their money. But it came with some hardships. Like how many dollar bills were we hunting for?
Yeah, I think we had to go to the bank and say, I'd like a bunch of $1 bills so I could pay the kids, appropriate amounts, teach them to make change, all those items. Well, I think it's a great, I enjoy this conversation because it's going to evolve and change. On one side, we're teaching our children that you put in work, you get resources. You put in work, you get resources. Wonderful. Great, great lesson. But it's also, we're dictating it to them. We're telling them, here's the requirements, here's what you need to do. I think the next level that we'll probably grow into, and we have people in our lives who have already graduated these levels, is to have the kids look around and say, hey, I noticed that the windows are dirtier than mom likes them or the dad likes them, and I could fix that. And I would make a pitch, like have the kid make a pitch to the parents to say, hey, for $5 I would go and do this, 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 this. And that's very much like, in my mind, an entrepreneurial mindset, to have them not just say, I put in work, I get resources, which is, in my mind, level one, perhaps. But the next one's saying, I can solve problems and I get better resources. I can look around, be aware, and find ways to solve problems. Eventually, wouldn't it be great having our kids employing their siblings, employing the other neighbor kids to build a small business, to bring in neighbors' trash cans or wash windows, whatever it may be. So I think this is very much, I like what you said at the beginning, Laura. This is not a one and done conversation, but really there's levels. And I like where we started. They did their chores, they got physical cash, they then had to sort and to allocate to certain activities. And I think that's good for now. But as they age, I see us developing all sorts of more lessons or structures to try and help them. It's like training wheels, help them learn to ride a bike, help them learn to be a productive member of the household, and teach them to be a little bit independent on how they're able to generate kind of the resources they want.
Yeah, because this culture is getting more and more inclined towards instant gratification. So we see it, we want it. I was having this conversation with another mom that they were in a store and their son wanted something in front of them, a toy, and pointed to it and said, can we buy that on Amazon right now? As if Amazon would deliver the toy faster than picking up the toy in the store and walking over to the counter and purchasing it. Or the son had just not been in stores very often. And yes, there's a convenience factor there. I know for our kids, it's not just, I guess they've been accustomed to not just picking the thing that they want, but they can pick the size and the color, and it's
Mm.
probably going to be on our doorstep within 24 to 48 hours. So how do we mitigate against that mindset of we're owed something instantly, that instant gratification. And so part of instilling this work ethic is also this delayed gratification. This is where that tendency towards spending and saving, like
Mm,
our son has already spent it 4 times over before he even earns the allowance or the special pay, right? And so by the time he gets there, now he just has to pick between what he wants to spend it on. But guaranteed, he's going to be buying something. And then our other daughter sits and walks through the store. And even if she's holding on to something that she really wants, she won't end up purchasing it, right? And so it's interesting to kind of encourage each one of them in different ways. It's okay to spend your money on something that you're going to enjoy. It's okay to see value in that, as well as it's okay to save for something bigger in the future. But I think that idea of like kind of recognizing that we're in such a culture of instant gratification and how to train our kids around the benefits of delayed gratification and working hard
mm.
for something, and what benefit, what gift they can receive from that too. So,
Yeah, that's so good. But I think as we, develop the conversation and as we talk with our kids as they get older, we're talking about some basic working principles of what they do. There will also be, I think, conversations about specifics. This is what investing looks like. We had a family friend that I think they did over the summer, but each of the kids kind of had a fake, they're older than I think high school age. They had like a fake stock portfolio. They kind of picked companies they thought was reasonable. They put a certain amount of dollar into a pretend stock portfolio and then saw how it did throughout the summer and then almost had a competition at the end of the summer who made more or less based on the investments. And that's I think a way to get people exposed to that. But I think there's one, I mean, even a personal story. I remember as a young adult, I didn't have credit. As a kid, I didn't have any credit under my name. And when I was going to buy a car, first my parents made me kind of save up the amount to be able to buy the car. But then rather than me just buying it, they actually had me go down to the bank. They went with me. I took out a loan, used the loan proceeds to buy the car. But then since I already had the enough saved up, I then paid back the loan every month for a full year out of an account I already had. But the whole point of that exercise was to establish credit, to have 12 months of credit that was paid on. And that was something of course, never would have thought to do myself. My parents were helping not just set me up with the principles, but also the very tangible, hey, when you get a little older, you're going to need some credit. Let's get your credit started in a good way. So you've now taken a loan, you've made 12 solid payments over the course of a year, you've paid off the loan in full. That was a benefit to start building my credit as a young adult.
right. Because if we think about this as an arc of independence, and obviously our kids are still fairly dependent on us. And like you were saying earlier, we're prescribing to them their allowance and the work that they need to do. But to our 13-year-old, we're starting to layer on some ideas of entrepreneurship. And I will say that what I've experienced so far, and we're 1 year into this teenager world, so some of our listeners are going to be laughing right now, but the more successful conversations we've had are when we identify with her vision or her goals. So we went on a family walk the other night after dinner and we set out some ideas about her saving money towards a large field trip that she has upcoming next year in 8th grade. And she anticipates this trip. She's excited to go, but it costs thousands of dollars. So I just asked her the question, what would it look like for you to be able to save that amount of money to pay for your own trip? What would that look like? And we spent the 15 or 20 minutes walk just coming up with different ideas. And she would throw out an idea. And let me tell you, it's hard as a parent because you want to just like, well, that's not going to work. Like, or your cost of materials is going to be way more than your profit margin. Like it's not worth it, right? Like, or you'd have to charge so much to pay for that. But let her, how to give space for her to like ideate and get out some ideas. And okay, well, what would you need for that? Okay, well, how would you let people know that that's a service that you offer? What is a service you could provide to your neighbors? So just kind of guiding her by questions. And then at the end of our walk, I had a chance to encourage her. Those are great ideas. I love what you came up with. They are now yours. Let me know how I can support you in those ideas. And that's a struggle for me. I have to, say it's easier for me just to say, okay, let's plan it. Let's get it on the calendar. I'll buy these materials, go and do. But I find that as she's moving more towards independence, I have to be equally letting go and let her have the opportunity to learn and to try things that she is interested in.
Yeah,
Easier
that's so
said
good.
than done.
Well, and I think it relates like when the kids were very little, like helping them tie their shoes. Initially, I was the one tying their shoes, and then they said, "I can do it. Let me try." And then sitting there painstakingly watching them struggle to tie their shoes, knowing we got to get out the door, but seeing that their struggle, their effort was so valuable, being able to celebrate it. And then soon enough, tying shoes wasn't an issue. Everyone just tied their own shoes. I think the same kind of applies to these money principles. It's not a instantly they're going to pick it up. Yeah, they're going to have to practice. They're going to try some things. It's going to be slower. It's going to take longer. But the benefit being when the kids could all tie their shoes, it was no longer part of the conversation. When our kids or anyone else who's listening, when their kids have a decent sense about money, the value of money, how they could generate money, how they're responsible with money, man, there's so much more value for the family of where they're headed. And ultimately, fast forward a number of decades, we see this a lot with our clients when they're adult children, they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they say, I'm not sure that this child could inherit, a part of my estate because they're just not good with money. How difficult that can be for parents to have to not just admit that, but struggle through. I still have to oversee my children versus the ones who say, oh yeah, just give it to them. They're fine. They'll do better than I will. Is a really wonderful place to be in. And the good or bad is that we're still too young to even know, right? We're in the midst. And so, like I said at the beginning, anyone who has thoughts, ideas, stories, we are all ears because I think it's important that we have a continual evolving conversation with our
Yeah.
kids about finances, about their futures.
I think parents should be. I would invite more parents to share more of these stories, whether or not they are raising their kids with a lot or a little, right? I think these financial principles still apply. And I like this idea of like, it's not a one and done conversation, there's layers to it. So the conversation we're having with our 7-year-old is going to be different than the one that we're having with our 13-year-old. But if we didn't start by having that conversation with our 7-year-olds, we would not yet be ready to
Mm.
have the level of conversation or complexity. And I have to out ourselves that we have progressed beyond the envelope system for allowance. So we do actually now have kind of digital accounts, and they have cards that they can track and see what they're saving towards and utilize those when they go out to stores. So that's been really fun. So we have evolved our own systems, and now we're starting to talk to our oldest about things like investing or things like credit cards. To share a personal story like you did from growing up, that's where I first learned about debt and the idea of a credit card was when I was really saving for a snowboard, and it was going to be one of the biggest purchases I had ever made. And I was in anticipation of some birthday money that I just knew my grandparents were going to give me this money. And so I'd saved half of it, and I knew I would be getting this money in like a week. And all of a sudden, this secondhand snowboard became available. It was a one time offer. It was not going to be available the next day. And I drove and I bought it. And I remember coming home that night, and it was such a serious conversation I had to have with my dad about spending money that you don't already have and just assuming that that money is going to be there. What happens? What if grandma and grandpa didn't decide to give you that birthday money this year? Then what would you do? Right? How would you pay this debt back that you promised this person you would pay them? Right? And so we talked about interest, we talked about debt, we talked about credit cards in terms of like, this is not your money, you are borrowing this money. And, I can laugh about it now. At the time, it was such a serious conversation, but it made such a huge impact on this idea of debt and borrowing and how it's ultimately so important to keep yourself in a cash healthy position because life has all sorts of unexpected outcomes. So whenever I think about a snowboard, I think about debt and cash.
Right. That's a great life lesson that you're able to learn. And I think that the benefit of some of the stuff is, kids can learn these things on a snowboard, right?
Mm,
Versus having to default on a loan as an adult or go through a
yes.
bankruptcy. But to kind of learn some of these lessons in a safe environment, the freedom to fail, I think is a big one. And with finances, like give kids chances to try something with money, to fail, to mess up, to learn, so that when they're older, when there's actual real consequences on the line, right, that they're able to have that wisdom and that fortitude to move forward.
Our friend J.R. Lay on our previous episode said freedom not to fail. We just use the F word, freedom to learn,
There you go.
right? Freedom to grow from their experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. As I say, that the world's changing as well, and I think how the next generation will treat money and handle money will be very different potentially than our generation, the one before us. We still have dollars and cents, right? But as the penny went away recently, there's various things that will be going away and changing, and so a digital footprint, potentially more risk factors, potentially easier spending, all those, will be something that will be slightly different. So preparing kids to walk into that new future, I think is so vital.
Yep. Absolutely. So there's so many more topics that we could cover off, and I know that there's a ton more ideas. I generally want to hear from some of our listeners about some of their ideas and best practices and lessons learned, frankly, for raising kids with money sense. I think that the best thing to remember and sort of our guiding light is that money is just a tool, right? That the goal here is to raise financially independent kids who then become adults and can invest in their family in a meaningful way. And so their lives can be built with purpose, with extreme ownership or responsibility and stewardship for that which they have been given. I believe that what we have been given. And so we have a responsibility and we have an opportunity to use it intentionally to benefit other people around us. And that truly is a gift. So we're going to keep that mindset as we go forward and learn as we go as these kids keep growing up. They just don't listen to me. I keep telling them, stop growing up so fast. They don't believe
Good.
me for some reason.
All right. They're doing great. They're doing great. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We look forward to, future times to have these conversations and dive into them together.
A few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.